Now then, how are you doing? I hope you're well. What with one thing and another, it's been a funny old year so far. Despite that, nature marches on unrelented. Well, in this demonstration, I want to show you how I like to use a wet-in-wet underwash as a basis for painting trees in full summer foliage. It's an extract from a much bigger project available to subscribers to my online student service, which includes the full painting demonstration and preliminary pencil sketch. Armed with my newly acquired familiarity with the scene from having sketched it, it's time to turn it into a watercolour. My first job is to draw it out in pencil. The primary objective is to plan out where everything goes, work out the size and shapes of all the individual elements, and then establish how they all relate to each other on the paper. There are many different ways to paint summer trees. When faced with multiple trees all in full foliage though, my approach is more or less the same every time. It begins with a wet-in-wet wash. I've mixed up some Prussian blue and I'm applying it, for a start at least, to the sky. The next colour I'm going to mix up is cadmium yellow. And for the next few minutes, those are the only two colours I'm going to be working with. I like to think of this as an underwash, a starting point or a loose, impressionistic foundation upon which I can build up my trees. Always remember that the light within any watercolour painting comes from the white of the paper. Think of it as a backlight. As such, it's important not to apply your paint too heavily. If you do, then that backlight won't break through and your painting will probably end up looking dull and muddy. Most important of all is to be content with whatever happens on the paper and not be tempted to go back in there and fix it or try to make it better, because it won't. Once I'm satisfied with my wet-in-wet underwash, I'm going to mix the cadmium yellow and Prussian blue together to make green. There are, of course, many different ways to produce green, not to mention a wide choice of off-the-shelf ready-mixed variations. For me, cadmium yellow and Prussian blue do the job admirably. I can alter the intensity of the green by adding more pigment, cooling it by adding more of the Prussian blue, or brightening it by adding extra cadmium yellow. And if I want a more earthy looking colour such as olive green, then I simply add a little burnt umber to it. What you can see me doing here is using the light green to establish in more detail the basic layout of the trees. Well, the natural progression from this is to start applying some colour to the stone walls. It's also worth noting that although I'm applying darker brush marks, it's the spaces between those brush marks that are as important, if not more important, than the brush marks themselves. always be aware of the negative spaces within your composition. I love it when I can start playing around with shadows. For me, this is when a painting really starts to come alive. Shadows tell us as much about the surface they're falling on as the objects that are casting them. For example, where they fall across the grass verges, they should curve. When they fall across the road, they should appear flat because the road itself is flat. In other words, shadows not only follow the contours of the surface they're falling on, but they actually help to visually explain those contours. As such, shadows help to convey the three-dimensional properties of those surfaces. As a general rule, if I'm painting summer trees, I will establish the foliage first before painting in the trunks and branches. Always think about continuity. If a branch disappears into a bunch of leaves and then reappears a little higher up or further out, then we need to believe that they are all parts of the same branch. A little thing that's been bothering me is the lack of definition between the sky and the trees in a couple of places. I could of course leave these areas as they are, and I know some would argue against what I'm doing here, but by repainting over the blue I can subtly increase the contrast. Softening the blue off then blends it back into the sky, and no one will be any the wiser. As a little added bonus, I've been able to create a few extra leaf shapes on the outer edges of the tree. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and that it may have given you some insight into how I approach trees in full summer foliage. While there were areas in which I could happily lose myself, the scene was largely an exercise in restraint, going to prove yet again that it's often what you don't put in that is as important, sometimes more important than what you do put in. Well, the full sketching and painting demonstration plus additional features and resources are available to subscribers of my online tuition service. Details on how to subscribe can be found in the description below. Until next time, take care.